Last year, 22% of all the new cars sold in Australia were light commercial, and a vast majority of those were these dual cab utes. To try and understand why such a large number are finding their way onto Australian driveways, we've brought 11 of the favourite and most interesting one-ton utes to the VinFast Proving Ground, where we're going to subject them to a series of data-driven tests. And then we're going to tell you what are the best dual cab utes money can buy.
We'll talk about exciting. This is the lifestyle category, starting with the Ford Ranger Raptor with its Baja-inspired suspension. Next is the Mazda BT50 in Thunder mode. We've got the Toyota Rugged X with its premium factory accessories. And lastly, the Jeep Gladiator Rubicon. There's nothing else like this on the road. Let's go have some fun.
In our mainstream category, we have 5 models, starting with the all-new Isuzu D-Max. Now, this car obviously mechanically identical to the Mazda BT50, but as that car is in Thunder trim, this is the more affordable option. Mitsubishi's Triton is also here. Beneath that dynamic shield family styling there is a largely unchanged mechanical drivetrain. And speaking of which, it's the same deal for the Nissan Navara. Still got the strong 2.3 litre twin turbo diesel under there, under a nice new facelift. Ford's Ranger is also here in ultra popular XLT level of specification. This has the more advanced engine in it, the smaller 2 litre, but twin turbos means it has 500 Newton meters. But the car they're all here to beat is this, the Toyota Hilux. This is in the most popular SR5 level of specification, and the Hilux is Australia's favourite dual cab. It's going to be a tough battle.
Rounding out the field, we've got our budget category, starting with the GWM Cannon. Loaded with tech and super comfortable, but is that enough to knock the big dogs off the top? Lastly, the SsangYong Musso, huge tray and a coil-sprung rear end.
Evan, that's our 11 utes, but now it's time to start putting them through their paces. The process will be thorough and objective, with each test producing measurable results that can be easily compared with the 10 other vehicles. Dynamics evaluation will determine how each model behaves on the road, while 4x4 tests gauge how they fare off-road. Performance testing looks at acceleration from standstill and in gear, as well as braking performance. And the acceleration performance analysis is repeated in the payload and tow testing, this time with a 500 kilo load on board, and then a third time with a significant trailer load hooked up. Use the time codes to skip ahead or navigate to your favourite part using the progress bar below. Let's kick things off with the dynamics. The VinFast Proving Ground offers an extensive ride and handling facility that recreates a wide range of surfaces and conditions typically found on public roads. It's here that each ute is closely examined for noise, vibration and harshness, as well as general assessment of on-road attributes including low-speed manoeuvring and manners. Filling 4 seats with adults can reveal some surprising handling characteristics, as well as providing an opportunity to evaluate rear seat comfort and features.
The most astounding thing for me, I think, is the fact that the Ranger has held up so well after 10 years, essentially, on the market. Ford really was ahead of the game back in 2011 when it was released, and in 2021 it still leads in so many important areas. It's certainly the most pleasurable to drive, especially if you like steering feel and feedback. It's the most comfortable to ride in. It's astounding that an Australian team have managed to put together a car that has had such longevity and kind of still lauds it in its class. It's great. Coming into this comparison, I was expecting a bit more from a few of the newer cars. The BT50 and Isuzu D-Max twins, for instance, they are very good trucks, and in some ways they're class leading. In terms of driver interaction and enjoyment, as well as ride and comfort and refinement, they still trail the Ranger, and the Ranger is, as I said, 10 years old. I think I expected more from the Canon by GWM. High hopes there, but in the end, you get what you pay for because it just isn't on the same level or in the same league in terms of ride comfort, refinement, performance and driver appeal. So that's another disappointing thing for me.
With twin live axles and off-road focused tyres, it was little surprise that the Jeep performed poorly on-road and fell to the bottom of the pack. The Mazda and Isuzu mechanical twins put up a strong fight, but ultimately it was the pair of blue oval badge contenders that demonstrated the Ranger's long-standing on-road manners are still the benchmark to beat. If you've liked this video, you know what to do. Hit subscribe or give us a like, or tell a friend, or come and untangle me from this sports bar.
Next up, we're off to the skid pan to really test the performance characteristics of each of these dual cab utes. While modern utes are leaps and bounds ahead of previous generations in terms of performance, can they accelerate and brake safely enough for you to consider putting your family in? Straight line performance tests were undertaken and broken down into a 0 to 100 km/h as well as 60 to 100 km/h runs to develop a solid understanding of how each vehicle accelerated. It's all well and good to go fast, but how each ute stops is just as important. To determine which ute has the best braking performance, we conducted a series of wet and dry brake tests.
The standout performer today was undoubtedly the Ford Ranger XLT. You might think, why the XLT and not the Raptor? They've got the same engine, but the Raptor is quite a bit heavier, and it's remarkable how much difference that makes. The XLT basically blew everything else away. It just rocketed off the line, 8.9 seconds to 100, which is pretty quick for a normal sedan, let alone a dual cab, and it was the only one of the diesels to crack 10 seconds. There were a couple of utes that were obviously the slowest, which were the cheapest utes we have here. The SsangYong Musso was 11.5 seconds to 100, and the Great Wall was 11.4. The SsangYong feels quite a lot stronger when you're from behind the wheel. You feel like you've got more grunt available, but they were essentially as fast as each other. I guess the Great Wall feels like the weakest car here. It feels like a small engine pulling a lot of ute. It always feels to be working quite hard, but it wasn't necessarily that much slower than the rest. Well, the bad news is that none of these dual cab utes brake particularly well, which might not be surprising. They're heavy, they haven't got particularly good tyres on them, they've got a high centre of gravity. But some of the standouts were the Triton, the D-Max, the Hilux, the BT50, all of those just scraped under 40 metres, which isn't a particularly good result. Like a passenger car will normally do about 34, 35 metres to brake from 100 kilometres an hour in the dry, whereas these utes are up around the 40 metre mark, and some of them are a lot worse than that. Standouts for a different reason were the Rangers. They were pretty good against the stopwatch in acceleration, but in deceleration, they're very poor. On the wet braking, a lot of it came down to the tyres, which is always important. So obviously the more road-focused tyres you've got, the better they're probably going to perform, which is why the D-Max stood out and why cars like the Ranger Raptor or the Gladiator in particular just felt like they were sailing across the top of the surface on the water. They didn't really want to bite in, and it was just ABS the whole way. Some of the wet braking behaviour was actually pretty alarming. Hit the brakes at 100 k's an hour and they'd squirm around even with ESP and ABS on and everything like that. They would sort of take corrective lock. If you put steering in, it wouldn't really do much. And the difference between wet and dry braking, we're adding 18, 20 metres, sometimes more, between the wet and the dry surface, which could be disastrous in an emergency situation.
As the only model with 6 cylinders and petrol power, you might expect the Jeep to dominate on a performance battle. But in this test, muscular torque and strong braking were key to coming out on top. Once again, the cheaper options languished, while solid diesel donks shone. The Ford Ranger was a surprise, as it didn't perform anywhere as well while braking as it did when accelerating. The GWM Canon and SsangYong Musso were left lacking in this field, taking up the rear end result-wise for both acceleration and braking performance.
If you're going to be spending a lot of time in a 1-ton ute, then the interior is a big deal. Starting with the Ford Ranger is probably a good place because this is one of the oldest models we're testing here. The Ford Ranger's front seats are not the most supportive or comfortable, and it's a similar story in the back. However, excellent rear legroom and space all round redeems the cabin, along with styling that has aged well and lots of charging and power options. Range-stopping Rangers get the full safety gamut, but the XLT lacks adaptive cruise, blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert.
Now we all know this vehicle's a value proposition, so while it's the cheaper end of the scale, it doesn't feel nasty in here, and I do like that about it. You've got everything you need and nothing you don't.
The Triton's somewhat utilitarian and basic cabin is offset by good all-round comfort with surprisingly supportive and comfortable seats in the front row. Add to that a comprehensive set of features and good visibility, and the Mitsubishi has a lot to be liked. Go for the GLS and you'll get 7 airbags, AEB and rear cross traffic alert, but no adaptive cruise. Probably one of the most important to look at is the Toyota Hilux, easily one of the most favourite one-ton utes in Australia. Look past the SR5's strange dashboard layout, fair seat comfort and relatively Spartan interior, and you'll find some attractive touches, including AEB, adaptive cruise control and lane keeping assistance. While a relatively recent ANCAP assessment awarded the Hilux with the full 5-star rating.
Up next, the D-Max. And there's one word that's in my head when I think of this vehicle, and that's practical. Everything here is simple and practical, and it works.
The Isuzu's cabin gets a lot done with very little. Plastics are widely used, but gloss black lifts the feel, along with leather that's applied to only the high wear areas and most frequent contact points. Ultimately though, the D-Max is a little short on comforts, but an extensive standard equipment list wins back points, including electric seats, keyless entry and start, and dual zone climate control. A respectable level of safety kit caps the deal with virtually every active safety feature under the sun. My favourite part of the BT50 Thunder's interior is when you're in here, you don't have to look at the exterior. I'm sorry, I don't like what they've done with the exterior styling of this particular variant. The interior though, as I say, is a great place to be. Mazda's BT50 offers perhaps the most car-like cabin in the ute lineup, with plush leather upholstered seats, excellent ergonomics and top quality finish and materials throughout. It lacks the modern digital displays of some other contenders, but makes up for the technological shortfall with just about every driver assistance system you can find. The Navara is probably one of those utes that doesn't get enough credit, and maybe that's because it's a little bit forgettable and benign. And that's because it's actually getting really rather old now. This one has just been updated for 2021, but there's still tons of features that show its age. The Navara's cabin is starting to look a little dated, but the STX boosts quality and feel with part leather upholstery. Comfort is generally good, but there's not enough under-thigh support and the seats are firm and cramped. Kit and safety levels are good, however, with 7 airbags, a full suite of active driver assistance systems, dual zone climate and keyless entry and start.
We're inside the Jeep Gladiator Rubicon, and as you can see, it's a pretty exciting place to be. But it's not only exciting, it's also utilitarian, which is the purpose of this vehicle.
There's certainly no ute cabin quite like the Jeep Gladiators, with an interior that appears stylish, functional and rugged. In practice though, some features and operation are compromised. But if you're after a hose-out interior, pop-out Bluetooth speaker, removable doors, windscreen and roof, then you have but one choice. The Gladiator doesn't stack up quite as well when it comes to safety, with only 4 airbags and a 3-star rating awarded by ANCAP.
So now we're inside the Toyota Rugged X. And look, let's be honest, if you've ever sat in a SR5 Hilux or many others in the range, it's a pretty familiar package.
In Rugged X form, the Hilux builds on the SR5 with more luxury equipment, including electric adjustment and heaters for the front seats. The standard sports bar lifts the look on the outside but limits rearward view, and there's no blind spot monitoring.
Up next, we're in the Ford Ranger Raptor. Now, talk about a mix between sporty and utilitarian.
The Raptor takes the Ranger's average cabin and embellishes it with equipment for a notable lift. You'll find supportive leather-wrapped seats unique to the variant, more leather on the steering wheel with a dead ahead marker and large metal gear shifters. There's the same practical features you'll find in the XLT, such as plenty of power points, as well as a good raft of safety gear. Even though SsangYong has been around in Australia longer than you might think, it's still regarded as one of the more challenger brands, and that means it has to do everything right. The Musso Spartan interior is initially misleading and hides a decent level of equipment, including all driver assistance systems but active cruise control. Heated and ventilated front seats, heated steering wheel, and lots of charging options are all highlights, if you can ignore the cabin styling that appears to be a generation old already. The first thing you notice when you get into the GWM is this huge screen. It's really impressive. It offers large digital displays, attractive materials and supportive leather seats. But notable omissions including reach adjustable steering start to tarnish the feel, along with a cheap feeling gear selector and some ergonomic oversights. It's well equipped for safety though, with good driver assistance features, although ANCAP is yet to hand down its ruling. An examination of the cabin comfort and technology gave the more affordable models an opportunity to claw back some badly needed points, with both the SsangYong and GWM sitting comfortably in the median region. None of our 11 stood out from the crowd, with the exception of the Mazda, which delivers a luxurious interior, sharp infotainment system, and a decisive victory here. The Canon's infotainment is visually impressive, but in practice, the features and function couldn't match its appearance. Overall, Ford's Sync 3 system was the top scorer, but some curious glitches in the Raptor's infotainment prevented it matching the Ranger XLT's high score.
Up next is our towing test. We're about to hook up the turbo taxi from Street Machine to these utes to see how they perform in the real world. Street Machine was kind enough to lend us their turbo taxi project Ford Falcon, which was strapped to a car trailer for a real-world example of what you'll be towing with these utes. Acceleration times from 20 km/h to 60 km/h were recorded, then we set out on a grueling test loop to see which ute towed the best. Now for the load wheel towing, we're certainly getting up there for what these dual cabs can handle safely. Sure, some are rated to tow more, but I think having a vehicle on the back of a car trailer, that's pretty much the sweet spot for what these utes can do. In regards to the winner, it's got to go to the Ford Ranger. It was the quickest between 20 and 60 kilometres, and also felt the most sure-footed. The suspension was amazing. You could tell this thing's been designed for Australian conditions. It's a great tow vehicle. A surprise package was the Jeep, the Gladiator Rubicon. With that 3.6 litre petrol motor, it pulled like nothing else. It really went. But in terms of a tow vehicle, it was probably one of the worst. The suspension was all over the shop and the gearbox just didn't want to change. It was just happy sitting at $5,000 all day long. Towards the end of the pack in the towing field, we've got to give that to the SsangYong Musso, unfortunately. It was adequate performance-wise, but it did feel a little bit jiggly and it was certainly slow off the line. GWM's Canon did itself no favours, turning up to this test without a tow bar installed and forfeited any points, something to hide maybe. And that allowed the Toyota Hilux to demonstrate one of the reasons it continues to be an Australian favourite. Only the Ranger XLT could outhaul the Big T with impressive acceleration and exceptional road matters when hooked up.
Next up, we're loading a 500 kilo weight into the tray of each ute and going for a drive to see how they handle a payload. For payload testing, the same process used in the tow testing was repeated. This time though, the trailer was unhitched and a 500 kilo dead mass secured in the rear load area. As this class of vehicle gets its name from the ability to haul about a ton in the tub, the vehicles are loaded with half that maximum capacity.
There were a couple surprises today for the laden test, which involved both acceleration testing and a loop on the ride and handling circuit. Standout performer was the Ford Ranger XLT, which was not only a cut above its sibling in the Raptor, but above everything else for acceleration and its composure around the ride and handling with 500 kilos on the back. Yeah, it just felt really composed. The ride wasn't too compromised by that load, and it just felt really settled and almost predictable as well. Otherwise than that, there were some surprise performers in the Navara. I think that was a really good car. Even though it's on a coil sprung rear end, it handled the load quite well. It was very solid out there on the ride and handling circuit, and the transmission mapping was really good as well. And of course there are some cars that didn't perform too well either. Like the SsangYong Musso has a really huge tray, but when you lay in it with a lot of weight, the car's coil sprung rear end has nothing left to give in terms of ride absorbency, and it feels quite nervous out on the ride and handling loop. As for trays, a lot of them follow a familiar formula. Obviously the Hilux SR5 comes with a farmer's tray, which is a lot more practical. It's wide, it's easy to access, but it's also very shallow. Then you have the Jeep, which has a lot of features, including lights, adjustable tie-down points, fixed tie-down points, and a soft cover. But really, the biggest was the Musso and most practical. Then there's the tray in the GWM, which for a cheap car has a surprising amount of kit, including a step-down ladder in the rear tailgate, and some soft drop struts, which are missing on more expensive variants like the Rugged X.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, almost anything with a coil-sprung rear axle struggled with our half-ton Payload, except the Navara, which was the most stoic of the coil-spring tail-enders. But the testing was dominated by tried and tested leaf-sprung suspension, including the Mitsubishi Triton and, once again, Ford's Ranger XLT.
So it's safe to say you can't have a four-wheel drive dual cab ute test without a four-wheel drive component. We've come out to this purpose-built location to put each of these vehicles through exactly the same test. There's no favours here. Well, it's time to get dirty as we put these dual cab utes through our purpose-built off-road test course. We're looking to compare ground clearances, wheel travel, traction control systems, and how easily they engage 4x4. We also want to know how they ride over corrugations and washouts at speed, exactly how you would be testing them in the real world. Testers drove them down steep hills to measure low-range gearing, then pointed them at steep inclines to see if they bottomed out. Some utes did exceptionally well, while others struggled to make it to the top. The Musso struggled in the off-road test, due mainly to a lack of ground clearance. It bottomed out more than any other ute, and was the only ute that didn't make it up our steep test climb the first time around. Thankfully, there are aftermarket suspension lift kits available to fix this. It also doesn't have a selectable rear diff lock, rather an automatic rear diff lock, which isn't as practical as being able to select the locker when required. Low-range gearing was also a weak point, having to rely on hill descent control to come back down our steep test hill. Yeah, hill descent control all the way, you can hear it barking there. But it's done the job. It's made up for the not so great low range gearing. The engine feels really peaky as well, making smooth progress much more difficult than any others on test. I was very excited to take the GWM Cannon off-road, but that excitement didn't last long. The gear selector was a particular annoyance. It's overcomplicated and not what you want in a four-wheel drive where quick shifts from drive to reverse is required. It was also slow to engage 4x4, which is not ideal. Thankfully, traction control response seemed adequate and it was able to get through our test course, just not as easily as other utes thanks to a poor ramp over angle. Hill descent control worked well, and when combined with the rear selectable locker, mild off-roading is certainly a possibility. As a side note, and we're still not sure what happened here, but the Cannon was making some awful clunks and bangs from the rear end when making tight turns in our off-road test. The radio also decided it didn't want to turn off, requiring the vehicle to be switched off and on again. So the radio won't turn off. I hope you like the music. The first thing you notice about the Triton off-road is how nimble it is thanks to the shorter wheelbase and narrower dimensions. It's also packed with clever off-road features, such as Super Select 2, which allows you to run in 4x4 high range with the centre differential unlocked on road. There are also various terrain modes available, including rock, gravel, mud, snow and sand. Combined with the rear diff lock and decent traction control, the Triton went everywhere we wanted it to go. 4x4 engagement did take a few turns to get locked in, and the low-hanging rear vibration damper on the differential did touch on a few occasions. Suspension travel in the front end is also limited, and the brakes did suffer after driving through thick mud. Otherwise, it felt like a little tractor, and in a really good way. First impressions when driving the Ranger XLT off-road is how planted it is. The suspension is well suited to undulations and is compliant when the going gets tough. 4x4 engagement was quick and easy, however we did catch on the low factory side steps a few times. Steering felt excellent, and the gearing options available from the 10-speed gearbox made it feel like there was any gear for any situation. Yeah, you know, when they say that this has been tuned for Australian conditions and been tuned in Australia, I can see what they mean. And this little motor with the 10-speed gives you a lot of options. The motor was torquey when combined with said gearbox, but from experience we know the older 3.2 offers more grunt down low off-road. My main gripe is the traction control isn't as good off-road as the Hilux. It's good, but it's not Hilux good, and that's being really critical. Compared to the Ford Ranger, the SR5 Hilux definitely rode firmer on rough terrain. The steering also felt heavier, but not by much. The traction control system found in the Hilux is nothing short of amazing off-road. You can feel that as soon as a wheel slips, bang, bang, bang. It's just on it. That is a really well dialed in traction control system. Gearing is also sensational, providing plenty of pulling power up hills and wonderful engine braking down them. This platform's been around a few years now, and with this most recent update, Toyota, in my opinion, have created the most capable Hilux yet. It's a brilliantly capable 4x4, even in stock trim. The heart of any D-Max is the engine offered, and I found the lowdown torque provided by the 3-litre Isuzu motor to be perfectly suited to this gearbox. It's just power on tap when you need it. For off-roading like this, where you can just take your time and crawl, it's a perfect combination. While the traction control system found in the D-Max isn't Hilux good, you're able to coax every last inch of grip from the tyres by using the low-down, lazy power offered to your advantage. Like the Triton, it feels like a tractor in a good way. The suspension offered decent, but not best in the class wheel travel, and it certainly rode firm over rough ground. It was really good to see a rear diff lock fitted to the D-Max finally, as it dramatically improves the off-road capability over the previous generation. 4x4 engagement was smooth and really easy via a simple rotary dial, and when locked in low-range four-wheel drive, engine braking was slow and controlled on descents. While the suspension in the Navara felt soft when towing, it was at home on our off-road test track. Soft and flexible, just what you want. The gearing available was also sensational, seeing the Navara crawl down steep slopes at an absolute snail's pace. Dropping down. Walking speed. Effortless. I need to accelerate. Going downhill. Wow. At no stage did it bottom out either, and we tried our best to unsettle it. Heavy steering was again a letdown. However, this is something you're going to get used to over time. It's still worth mentioning. Four-wheel drive activation wasn't smooth, sadly, requiring a few attempts to get it into low range. But when it was locked in, the Navara performed really well. Has competent traction control, and it was able to get power down to the ground. I see the Navara as a bit of an underdog, and feel that with a suspension lift, it'd be a super handy performer off-road. The first thing you notice about the Ranger Raptor is how wide it is. We drove the Raptor second last out of this field, and it simply didn't want to sit in the wheel tracks carved out by previous 4x4s testing. Engaging low-range four-wheel drive was simple and easy, with various traction control modes to play with. Special mention must go to the seats, with those supportive side bolsters holding you in place no matter how rough the terrain was. And speaking of rough terrain, the Raptor suspension ate washouts for breakfast. This was by far the fastest vehicle through our test course without even trying. We're already at the border crossing section, so this is definitely the fastest time we've done across this entire test, because I'm not getting mucked around, not getting swayed around. The suspension's just eating it up. I'm going to climb out of the water crossing now. Try and just crawl it. Traction was great thanks to the BFG all-terrains. However, in terms of pure 4x4 capability, it wasn't the most capable on test. It's still very capable, and it was an absolute hoot to drive. Now, in terms of pure off-road capability, you'd be hard-pressed to find a more capable vehicle than the Gladiator. And while the Ford Ranger Raptor felt wide on the tracks, the Gladiator felt long. And this was the only real issue during our testing. Some larger tyres and a bit of suspension lift will fix this. Traction levels were simply incredible. The traction control system in this is, from what I've experienced, first class. But then if that doesn't work, we've got front and rear diff locks, solid axles, coil springs, all the recipes you want. All the things to make a good off-roader. 4x4 engagement was via a simple old school lever, and hey, they just work. And while the interior was cramped, it's easy to clean out after a day on the tracks. So while it's not perfect, with a few simple tweaks, the Jeep Gladiator Rubicon would be unstoppable off-road. I'm a fan of the factory accessories fitted to the Rugged X, especially the rock sliders, which work really well. It must be said though, I've never seen a vehicle that is more of a candidate for larger tyres than the Rugged X. It's begging for them. Now, interestingly, it does ride a little bit firmer, and I do believe that's because spring rates, especially in the front, have had to be altered just to cope with the extra weight of all that extra steel out front. As expected, the traction control system found in the Hilux range is first class, pulling the Hilux through everything, even on those small highway tyres. 4x4 activation was quick and easy, with excellent low-range gearing available. With a bigger set of tyres and a basic suspension lift, you'd have a practical ute day-to-day and a capable 4x4 on the weekends. And that's all it needs really, thanks to the factory-fitted bar work and recovery points. The BT50 Thunder from Mazda is a more lifestyle-orientated ute. However, when you look past the steel bull bar and flares fitted, it's essentially a D-Max. And that's a good thing. As per the D-Max, traction control wasn't top of the field, but the rear diff lock made up for any shortcomings. The wonderful 4JJ3 3-litre motor produces torque down low where you want it. This allows for smooth and easy going when negotiating rough terrain. I feel like I'm in complete control with this. With this motor and this gearbox combo, great steering, the suspension's doing its thing. The suspension does feel firm, as per the D-Max. 4x4 engagement is simple and effective, grabbing low range for the first time, as it should. The off-road component of what we've been doing is a major part of this test. We wanted to include lots of different disciplines, different terrains, to really get a good understanding of what these vehicles can and can't do. Now, in terms of the most capable on test, it's got to be the Jeep. It has to be front and rear lockers, sway bar disconnect, mud terrain tyres. This thing didn't even bat an eye. Absolutely amazing off-road. In terms of surprise package, I've got to say the Navara. I actually really liked the way it performed. The suspension felt good and the gearing was amazing. No need for hill descent control, it just crawled down with that engine braking. Bringing up the rear, I've got to say the least capable vehicle would have to be the SsangYong Musso. It struggled up some of the hill climbs that others were able to achieve at a crawling pace without any trouble. Once again, the cheap models slid into the back, quite literally, when the sealed road came to an end, leaving traditional off-road favourites to show them how it's done. While the Hilux and Ranger demonstrated excellent ability, the Jeep highlighted while it's still the most competent off-the-shelf 4x4 money can buy.
It might not be as glamorous as diff locks and turbos, but the cost of running a one-tonner can be a deal breaker for many. In this quiet test of numbers, the SsangYong demolished everything thanks to a bargain entry price, cheap servicing and a whopping 7-year warranty. The Mazda and Isuzu are mechanically almost identical, but the D-Max is offered with a warranty that extends a whole year longer than the BT50 at 6 years. If you've liked this video, you know what to do. Hit subscribe, give us a like, tell a friend, or maybe send me a postcard. At simple face value and on initial inspection, all one-ton utes may appear to be largely alike, including some more recent, lesser-known offerings at the budget end of the spectrum. On paper, each of the 11 models tested in our dual cab megatest offer respectable power and torque outputs, four-wheel drive, and somewhere to put the family and a load of kit. But it's only after you dig a little deeper that a whole world of difference separating the field becomes clear. Put simply, you get what you pay for. While the cheap Challengers include a decent amount of kit for your cash and apparent good value, the package looks less compelling when it comes to hard yakka. And while one-tonners used to be utilitarian workhorses, options like Raptor and Rubicon are injecting luxury and capability where farm machinery once played. Perhaps the closest battle is fought in the midfield, where familiar faces and brands offer a broad spectrum of on- and off-road ability combined with day-to-day ease of use. Mitsubishi's Triton is still proving that no frills and solid value are high up on Australia's ute must-haves, while the Nissan Navara continues to represent a stoic and often unsung hero in the market. But at the top of the pack is the venerable Ford Ranger XLT. Toyota's flagship Hilux Rugged X and fresh-faced Isuzu D-Max are incredibly complete machines. But the relatively new hardware isn't up to the recipe of sophisticated power plant combined with Aussie-engineered strength and dependability. The T6 Ranger might be in its twilight year, but the XLT is still the one-ton ute to beat.